Hello, hello. Hi. Okay, I think the mic, the sensitivity of it is a little bit high.
Yeah, it might depend on how far away you're
Yeah,
walking.
but I think we're mostly here. Hello, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I think it's fine now. Yes? Thank you. It was just three. Hi, Tom. Hi.
Ramin, are you here on the day of their exams?
No, I don't think so. I think I got through workshop.
I'm not here either.
Yeah. I'll give them my phone
Number? Will you be?
I will be.
I have to on that day, unfortunately, be away.
Yeah.
But
No, I give them their phone.
your number, right? Yeah. Okay.
3-hour revision lecture. Start in a few minutes. So now, would you like to take a seat there?
Yeah, I'll sit over there.
Regarding the course evaluation form, majority of you have filled out the course evaluation form. However, there's still a minority that haven't filled out the evaluation. I'll ask them to do that as soon as possible because the deadline is reaching basically till the end of this month to basically give your feedbacks on this course, and we both, I think, highly regard your feedbacks. So please do if you haven't done so far. The first hour, I'll cover the first term. The second hour, Sonali will cover the second term. So let's start. The overall plan of the lecture is that I first talk about what do I expect from you in the exams. The exam strategy, that means that your strategy in how to tackle the exam. The revision strategy. And then I'm going to talk about the topics of term 1 week by week. And then at the end of our lecture, if we find time, we can practice the exam questions if we find time. Now, there's a general rule. If you want to ask questions that are related to the content of the slides. Okay? Because I guarantee that I'm going to answer most of your frequently asked questions. So, related to each slides. At the end, we open up, before going to the topics, we'll open up for Q&A. Okay. The exam is 3 hours, 10 essay questions. You need to answer 3. 3 hours, 10 essay questions. You need to pick 3 and answer them. Okay, what do I expect in the exam? You remember the Fight Club, right? What was the first rule of the Fight Club?
Don't talk about Fight Club.
What was the second rule?
Don't talk about Fight Club.
Is the same with the exam. The first rule to get a good mark in the exam is good handwriting. The second rule is good handwriting, right? this is the most important thing. We're going to mark about 140 papers, okay? So, like, pause, think about a moment. It's not about your structure, it's not about catching up the readings. Basic things, right? You have to have a good writing so we were able to read your paper, okay? Now, the other thing is answer the question, right? If you want a recipe for getting a bad mark, is that you write a 5-page, essay, and in the end you don't answer the question. You're showing a lot of knowledge, I've revised, I know this theory, I know that theory, but they are not related to the question. So answer the question. If the question has 2 parts, right, give equal weight to them in your answer. Right? Don't spend, 70% of your essay addressing the first part of the question. Okay? Give them equal measures. We prefer short essays. It's about quality, not quantity. Believe me. I cannot overstate this. It's about quality, not quantity. Is Joshua in? Joshua? No. I think my best essays were the shortest one. I remember marking an essay that was 1,700. Way below the word count, and it was one of the best essays. So you can get a distinction, you can get a first class mark by writing just 3 pages. If you go beyond that, there's a diminishing return, right? There's a diminishing return. We get tired and tired and tired, you lose your mark. You're shooting yourself on the leg. Okay, so 3 pages most, with good handwriting. We're not looking for a sophisticated answer. It's not like your essay assignment, okay? That you're going to say, a sophisticated, I know this theory, that theory, and how do I differentiate myself? No, we're not looking for a sophisticated answer. We're looking for a basic answer that shows us that you have been in this class, engaged with the readings, right? You know the general debates about the question. So the expectation is lower than your essay. And as I say, it's more about the format. I'll talk about the format of it. Good handwriting, good structure, make sure you answer the question. Any question here in this slide? Yes, Abby?
What kind of paper, how big will our handwriting be? What kind of line size? And it makes a difference in how much you can write too.
Yes?
It does. So, pages are of that size? Regular line size, huh?
Regular printer, even smaller than
that.
Right. So compare to your own ability. You have your difference. Each of you have a style of writing. Small fonts, big fonts is your own style. Okay. Whatever your style, okay, go for the small version, the concise version. Okay. Believe me, it's about quality, not quantity. You have to repeat it. It's about quality, not quantity. It's about quality, not quantity. Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Yes, Chrissy?
I noticed the post on the question before the debate or argument. How many arguments do you expect to see?
I will get to that. Essay structure. Okay. Introduction, main body, and then the conclusion. What do I expect in the introduction? Basic roadmap of your essay. This essay, addresses this and that. The first section talks about this. The second section talks about that. Third section talks about X. And yes?
Would you have to also do the stage setting, the introduction like we did with our language?
Not really. Even if you are, it's better you do it, but one sentence would suffice. One sentence would suffice for the stage setting. Any questions? So one sentence of stage setting is enough, and then give me the roadmap. Preferably, give me your short answer. Give me your short answer. Now, the main body, define the terms. Christy, this is your answer to the question. Now, each question you have, there are different debates. Right? We call them theoretical debates. Some say that education is a magic bullet for economic development. Some say not. You know, sometimes, I don't know, some people think that free trade is good. Some people say, no, free trade is not good. You need to have an intervention. Different sides of the debates, okay? You need to show me the different sides of the debates. Now, support them or refute them with concrete examples. Now, for instance, if you want to discussing whether free trade is good for economic development or not, some people say it's good, some people say it's not. Now, how do you go for the evidence? Of course, in the exam, you cannot give me general evidence, right? You know, this study has, conducted statistical analysis on 145 countries and found that there is a negative correlation. No, you're not able to do that. But you're able to give me case studies, country examples for each debate, right? So, in the main body, you give me the different sides of the debates about the question. You examine each of those debates with country examples, case studies from Asia and Africa. And then you gave me your conclusion. Now, you can cite major authors in the debate, but it's not necessary. It helps your mark. It's not necessary. Now, regarding the education, for instance, the education topic, who are the main authors in there? Easterly, very good. Who else?
Pritchett?
Exactly. Pritchett and Easterly. It helps your mark, but it's not necessary. Okay. However, as I always say, it could backfire. Name dropping can backfire. Don't do it too much. We're looking for like 2 or 3 main, authors in the debates. Sometimes there are no main authors in the debate. Sometimes there are. If you cite them, it helps. For the main body, divide your arguments into different sections with headings. Don't just write, section 1 like this. Don't write section 1. It has to have a title. Now, the main thing, of course, there has to be a connection between sections. Okay? Don't just throw sections, one after another. They have to follow. They say, first, I'm going to talk about pro-free trade. In the after, it's in this section. You discuss blah, blah, blah. In the end, you say, however, there are people who are, argue against this position, which leads you to against free trade. So in this way, you make a connection between different sections. Finally, this is the most important part, the conclusion. The conclusion, summarize your points and answer the question. Explicitly answer the question in your conclusions. Any questions on the slide? Okay. Exam strategy. Okay. What do I recommend you to do in the exam? First of all, plan your answers. Get a question, the first thing, you choose your questions. Most of you, you choose your questions. And question 1, plan your answer. Take 5 minutes of your time to plan in your head, the brainstorm, right? Some people may not do it. It depends on you, okay? But I recommend you do it. Don't spend more than an hour per question. Don't spend more than an hour per question. Each question has an equal weight. So don't try to give me a very good answer in question 1, like 74, and then the others are 62, 55. This is not a good strategy, right? Divide your energy among questions equally. Divide the time and your energies among the questions equally. This is very important. Make sure you answer 3 questions. This is the most important thing. Because if you give me 2, 78, and 74, and you don't answer this, you probably might fail. Okay? So, under any condition, if you want to write a paragraph, even a paragraph, make sure you answer all the 3 questions. Now, again, if you're running out of time, your question 3, in the middle of it, you're running out of time. Go straight to the conclusion. Give me the answer. Make sure you give me the conclusion, give me the answer, and go back and start writing the main body. If you don't have enough time to finish the main body, just leave the subsections. So I know the general arguments in your head. What were you about to do? Yes? Okay. Any questions here?
I think we should tell them to take the time and read the questions, obviously. Take a good, 7 to 10 minutes, read the questions, choose them carefully, so that you're not stopping in the middle. What's the third question about again? So make sure you know which ones you're going to do. That helps.
I think we both agree most of the low marks are caused by misunderstanding of the question.
That's right, yeah. So you stop after 2 and then wonder which one should I do as a third. You don't do that, make sure you know what to do.
Any questions? Okay. Now, practice, 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 right? The exam is not just about your knowledge, it's about the format. It has its own technique. And your first year students, you have to master it. And you will master it, okay? So knowledge is something, how much you've done the readings. Actually doing the auto exam, that you sit down, you time yourself, write an essay in 3 hours is a separate thing. And you make sure that you give a lot of attention to this. So practice, practice, practice. What do I mean? Pick a last year's paper exam. It's available on the library website. And do a mock exam of yourself. Time yourself. Okay? Time yourself. Note some past year questions may be, not relevant for this year, but I'm pretty sure for every year you'll be able to find questions that relate to this course. Every year, I think for the past 7 or 8 years. Okay. Now, this is very important. After finishing your mock exam, read your own answers. This is very important. Because when you start reading them, you realize, I'm missing a lot of words. And there's not a good connection between my, arguments. I've actually done this. I did it myself, all these things. So it really helps. Again, you might have your personal strategy is different. I'm just sharing my knowledge and experience. Okay? Any questions? Okay. Preparation strategy. Okay. Now, we just talked about general things in the exam. Now, for the revision, before going to the exam, what would be my strategy in revision? Okay. Not frequently asked questions, what is the ideal number of topics we should prepare? The short answer is that it's your personal choice. Okay? It's your personal choice. I would recommend 6 topics. Okay? However, there are a lot of overlaps between the topics, both for term 1 and term 2. Okay. For instance, in term 1, foreign trade and developmental states have a lot of overlap with each other. One talks about, free trade, the other talks about state intervention. Right. A lot of overlap. The other topic with a lot of overlap are physical capital and human capital, for instance. In term 2, there are a lot of overlaps as well. Now, when you want to prepare for a topic, start with the lecture notes. Lecture notes, lecture slides, and your own essays and presentations. This is where, if you've done a, unassessed presentation, during the term will help. So, the main thing is lecture notes, lecture slides, your own essays. You can get a distinction by confining yourself to these materials. If you find extra time, you can go to the readings. Okay? Any questions? So stick with lecture notes, lecture slides, and your own essay and presentations. The main materials, the key issues are discussed there. And our questions are regarding the key issues in the debate. Questions? Yes?
I have a question about your recommendation. So if there's only 10...
Speak a little bit louder.
Yes, sorry. I have a question about your recommendation. So if there's 10 topics, how do we make, if we choose 6, how do we make sure we're not choosing part of the 9 that are not in there?
Again, overlap. But I think you have to be incredibly unlucky. Basically. It's almost, I think so you prepare for 6 topics, and
Maybe 8.
Sorry?
Maybe 8.
No, again, I think I'm misunderstood. Could you repeat the question?
Because we have in total 19 topics, 19 weeks.
Okay.
19, 20 weeks. So there's 9 that might not come up. So if
Yeah.
you choose 6, only that might
No, I'll explain to you why. Let me get into term 2. Term 1, there are a lot of overlaps. So basically, each 2 week is considered as a topic,
Okay.
which helps you a lot. Right? It's actually not 19 topics. Because there are a lot of overlaps, it's actually much more.
But 10.
It's
Maybe 12.
12 topics. 12 topics. Because, lots of, for instance, when you want to talk about China or India, right, it's just country examples. The theoretical debates, you already know them. Right? Growth before 1950 and after 1950, really one topic. Measurement of development, 2 weeks, one topic, really. So let me get to the, once we go through topic by topic, you see the logic. Okay, any questions? Okay, general questions, we're going to go topic one by one. General questions. We can practice them afterwards if you find time. So let's go for topic one by one for this term, my term. Okay, week 1 and 2, measuring development. What are the key issues in here? What is GDP? How do we measure it? The shortcomings of GDP. Right? GDP does not, for instance, measure the value of public services. GDP does not measure the value done by women or subsistence farming. And more philosophical, is development about just getting rich? Becoming richer, your income goes up, right? What about the other things? Life expectancy, health, education. There are 2 different, competing schools of thought, if you remember. Human development approach and happiness approach. They say development is not just about becoming rich, your income grows, right? It's about other things as well. And most importantly, the income per capita, when it increases, does not automatically brings you happiness or opportunities in education and health. Sample questions from last year. What are the main limitations of using GDP per head as a measure of economic development? 2011, there's a strong positive link between GDP per capita and other indicators of human development like, HDI, yes. Capabilities like, give me more specific indicators. Education, health, right? Governments should therefore concentrate on promoting economic growth. You discussed them. First, for instance, we'll talk about, you can say, first I begin with, the school of thought that thinks that development is just about economic growth. And then you criticize that, for instance. You say, no, economic growth does not automatically lead to human development, lead to better life expectancy, better education, or better happiness. Okay, so there's a discord. Any questions in here? So Giannina, going back to your point, really one topic. Growth before and after 1950. Well, this is a very kind of broad topic, but the key issue is we learn is the importance of technological development for long-term economic growth. Advantage of backwardness. If you're poor, you're starting from behind, you have the luxury of copying the latest technology, learning the latest technology from more advanced countries. As we talked about, catch-up industrialization through technological learning. These are the basic things. Any questions? Okay. Week 5, population and labor. Key issues. Demographic transition. Now this topic has two separate questions. Really. One talks about what factors influence the number of children per woman? Really. It's about fertility rates. Remember, is it about income per capita? When you become rich, the women have lower number of kids. Is it because of education? Is it because of urbanization? So the whole thing is to find out what determines the number of kids per woman. Okay. Now there's a separate topic in this week that talks about the economic effects of population growth. The effect of population growth on economic growth. And remember, we had two schools of thought here. Population optimists, population pessimists. Who was the most important figure here? Population pessimists. Thank you. And new demography approach. Now, past year questions. What has the post-1970 fertility decline? Why has the post-1970 fertility decline been so much faster in Asia than in sub-Saharan Africa? So this question relates to which topic in this week? We had two key issues in this week. The behavior of the fertility behavior, the effect of population on economic growth. Now this question relates to which of them? Sorry? Fertility rate, exactly. The second question, does rapid population growth always lead to slower growth in output per person? It's about the economic effect of population. Any questions regarding this week? Okay. Week 7 reading, week 6 reading, week 7. Investment in physical capital. Key issues, remember just one important question on this topic. Is investment in physical capital a sufficient or necessary factor for economic growth? We talked about traditional development economics, Harrod Dumore model, which says, just invest. The problem of, the problem of being poor is that you don't have enough money, enough savings for investment. And you invest, economic growth would automatically follow. So investment in physical capital is a sufficient factor for economic growth. Now, the other school, neoclassical, says, no, this is not necessarily the case. You can have high investment rates, high savings rate, high investment rates, but not a lot of economic growth, because those investments are done poorly. There's no learning. You just mindlessly copy technology from somewhere else. And the problem of savings gap in poor countries. Remember, if you're starting, you're poor, you don't have savings, therefore you cannot invest. The productivity is low, therefore you remain poor. The poverty trap. Roustow's model, how you get out of the poverty trap, foreign aid. This question is about Roustow's economic model. Okay, questions? Yes?
For this first question, because it's essentially asking you whether or not the country examples support the theory, so you have to know, would your main kind of paragraphs just be country example after country example, whether or not it supports the thing?
No, okay, very good question. Very good question, right? This question does not, it's actually one part, right? It's not two parts. The second part just tells you that give me examples. That's all. That's all, right? Most of our questions are designed like this. We ask a general question, and say, support your answers with country examples. Okay, so you include country examples when you're discussing different debates, remember? It's as before. You get a question, you think about what are the key issues, what are the major debates in here. You explain those debates, right? And you weight those debates against the evidence. This is where you give me country examples. So when you want to, for instance, discuss Roustow's, Roustow says, start with textile, labor-intensive industries, then go to capital-intensive industries and knowledge-intensive industries, right? If you want to, for instance, you can give a supporting example of Roustow, or a refuting example. You say South Korea, right, started with labor-intensive industries, but suddenly jumped into capital-intensive industries. So this example, this country example, actually refutes Roustow's model. Or you can give a supporting example of Roustow's model. Yeah? Okay. Investment in human capital, very similar question to the previous topic. Is investment in human capital a sufficient or necessary factor for economic growth? The major debate here. Education optimists, education pessimists. Past year questions, I think this was your essay question as well. Education is another magic formula that has failed to live up to expectations. To what extent is this assessment of the impact of educational expansion justified by the experience of Asian and sub-Saharan African countries? You discuss education pessimists and optimists, right? You take sides by reviewing the examples. And by the examples, you give me country-specific. I don't expect you to give me remember the general evidence. The statistical study done on 145 countries shows us that this factor is negative. No, I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting you to give me relevant case studies, relevant country examples. Questions? Foreign trade. Okay. So remember, going back, there is a lot of overlap between investment in physical capital and investment in human capital. Now it's the same with foreign trade and developmental states. Now what does foreign trade, the key issue is a very simple thing. Some people say when you open up your economy to trade and foreign investment, catch up automatically happens. foreign investors come into your country and pick up the sectors you have opportunity to compete globally, right? They invest in there, they give you the technology, you start to grow. And you gradually, the industrial upgrading happens automatically. So these are the proponents of free trade. Some other people say, no, actually, this doesn't happen automatically, the industrial upgrading, the catch-up, right, of development. Learning technology takes time, right? So it needs state intervention. The major schools, pro-trade arguments, the comparative advantage theory and theory of absolute advantage. Against free trade, Frederick List, do you remember his arguments? Anyone? Not you, Jacob. Yes? Sorry? Infant industry, exactly. What was his argument for infant industry?
So you can't open up straight away because you won't be able to compete.
Sorry?
You can't open up your trade straight away because you won't be able to compete with people who've already done it before. So you protect it, let it grow, and then like a child you kind of don't overprotect it because then it grows.
Exactly, thank you. And the other argument...
Question, what do you mean by let it grow?
So you let it strengthen itself in the domestic market.
Yeah, and what happens in the domestic market? Sorry,
After the domestic
just an example of how to be more precise in any, generally. Yeah, what are you trying to do in the domestic market?
So you encourage trade within your own.
Yeah, so increasing volume of
Yeah.
output. And what happens as you increase volume of output?
You have more money to invest in that.
Costs fall, so productivity increases.
Yeah.
So by let it grow, we mean productivity increases. So just an example of precision, because in an exam, you don't say let it grow. You protect until you have enough of cost per output falls, productivity increases, so then you're efficient, then you compete on global markets. So just your train of thought must be precise. Okay.
Going back to your analogy, is like your kid learns better by doing. Learning by doing improves the productivity. If you increases your production scale, continue to do it, learning by doing. And Purdish and Singer hypothesis, remember that it was the argument that, when you open up, usually developing countries have, mostly the financial ability to compete in primary sectors, in commodity sectors. And some people say this is a bad idea because you remain trapped in there, you never get rich. Okay, the industrial upgrading doesn't happen automatically if you start with primary sectors. So past your questions, very straight to the comparative advantage theory was about free trade. Developing countries should not try to industrialize because their comparative advantage lies elsewhere. For instance, if you have, a big country, a lot of land, you might have a comparative advantage in agriculture. So you should start with agriculture, you become rich, and then go to the other sectors. This is basically a pro-trade argument. Discuss it. The other one, trade liberalization, opening up to foreign direct investment in developing countries, will benefit developed countries at the expense of developing countries. This is about which theory? That basically it's a zero-sum game in a free-flow world. Rich countries win, poor countries lose. Anyone remember the theory? Sorry. Anyone? Dependency theory, basically. Okay. Again, a related topic, developmental states. Developmental states says, look, catch-up development and industrial upgrading does not happen automatically. It needs state intervention. And the key term in this topic is industrial policy. As I always say, remember, whenever you hear industrial policy, it's about state intervention in the economy against free trade. The state needs to come up with the right interventionist policies and implement them effectively. The right industrial policies and implement them effectively. You know, the country example we discussed in this here was South Korea. The role of industrial policy and development in South Korea and other East Asian economies. The role of state interventionist policies. Past year questions, we should not overstate the extent to which South Korea pushed ahead of its comparative advantage. Right. Remember, we talked about industrial policy. South Korea did not escape from its comparative advantage, which was agriculture. It started with something else. It is not a minimal state, but an interventionist developmental state that is one best able to promote rapid economic growth. Again, the basic question. Does catch-up happen automatically if you open up? Or it needs an active intervention from the state. The key contribution of government in fast-growing East Asian economies has been their management of free trade, foreign trade. Again, industrial policy, interventionism. What sort of state intervention can best promote accelerating economic growth in low-income countries? Questions? Final topic, resource curse. Key issues. We talked about resource curse as having, natural resources actually bad for economic development. You had two sorts of explanations: economic explanations, political explanations. And we talked about the country example of Nigeria. However, we said we should be careful about the resource curse. This is not always and everywhere occurs. Natural resources like oil is not everywhere and always occurs. You can find countries that have escaped. Past year questions: natural resource scarcity is much more likely to promote economic growth than natural resource abundance. Discussed with reference to both Asia and Africa. So for instance, when you're discussing that, you can give an example of South Korea, a resource poor country, didn't have a lot of it, compared to Nigeria, an oil-rich country. And talked about economic explanation of the curse and political explanation of the curse. A development strategy based around the expropriation of primary commodities, again, raw materials like oil and minerals, is little more than a road to ruin. Okay, covered the topics. If we find time in the end of the lecture, we can practice these questions. Any questions from term one? Yes? Could you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah. Some people have said the coursework questions, like the topic won't come up in the exam. So like there's a question about China that can't come up in the exam.
That's clear for the master's students.
Okay.
So no? Yes, anyone from term one? Okay, so
Go
now.
straight through, do you know, right?
Sorry?
We'll go straight through. They don't need a break.
Oh.
Okay?
Let's go straight.
Go straight
Okay,
through.
how many? Anyone from break?
No, wow.
Okay. I would say let's push and then for
Yeah.
term two, and once it's done, we'll come back to the practice session.
Let's go. Okay, so term two. I'm just going to talk you through it, okay? And I've given you extensive slides, and we can drag them up if we need. But so I'm going to do it because Ramin's done the general. I'm just going to do topic by topic. My general point is the point I made to you, is that be very precise. Yeah, what are we talking about? We're talking about productivity. Are we talking about economic growth? When we talk about, say, the effects of, what are the effects of foreign aid, what are they, for instance, be precise. What are the effects on productivity? What do we mean by productivity? Is it total factor, or just for now, what do we mean by productivity? What do we mean by economic growth? What do we mean by other kinds of indirect effects and so on? So that, be rigorous in the way you answer your question. Okay, so be careful, have some thought, which is why sit down before every question, plan it. Do, sketch out the answer. And for, the bulk, for me, the important part is a bulk of your analysis. So be precise, be accurate, And wherever possible, this is just to read, just saying what Ramin said before, use country examples. And I don't also have a problem if you can remember general kind of overall studies on institutions, all of the studies, econometric studies which link institutions to economic growth, you'd put that in. There are all these studies that show there's a relationship, but what's the problem with those studies? Very briefly, okay? So I'll go through topic by topic. We started with poverty. Now, poverty and inequality, again, the two issues, they're kind of linked, okay? They're separate, but if you're doing one, I'd do the other. If that was one of the topics you're going to choose, I'll choose poverty and study both together. Bearing in mind that the question might relate to poverty or inequality, it might be one. However, if you're doing poverty, the inequality issues are very relevant. That's why you have to bring it in together. Now, we looked at, what do we mean by poverty? We looked at who are the poor. And the overall analytical question was, is economic growth? What is the relationship between growth and poverty? And we looked at countries. What happens? Is economic growth alone sufficient for poverty reduction? Does poverty reduction lead to economic growth? So it can go both ways. And the reason inequality comes into this, and remember I showed you the graph with what happens with if you grow, say, at 5% with a fairly equal distribution of income, if you go 5% with a more unequal distribution of income, the impact on poverty is quite different. So inequality is then linked to poverty. So those two. Institutions, we did really looking at how important are institutions for economic development and economic growth. And so what do we mean, firstly? With a question on institutions, you need to know what do we mean by institutions. So tell me, in development economics, what do we mean by institutions? What are we talking about here? Then, what are the debates? And why do some people say that institutions are good for growth? Some of them is historical, if you remember. There are historical examples. They use colonialism, and certain types of institutions that developed under colonialism show us that these institutions had a negative impact on growth, positive impact on growth. So the key, if you remember, one of the key points we hooked our institutions lecture was the point that there are some empirical theories who say that about 75% of the differences in income across countries can be explained by institutions. Okay, and we also ended that lecture by saying 75% is a huge number. So really, are you saying that 75% of differences across countries can be explained? Is it the only factor? So if there's a question on institutions, you need to know the pros and cons. Why do we say institutions are the key factor? In what way? Is it for growth or is it for poverty reduction? And also, apart from institutions, what else matters? So we have Sachs, who argues that actually it's not only institutions, geography matters. And bring in, again, examples. We've taught, our last 3 lectures, so we did India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa. Bring in examples from there to connect to institutions. We did foreign aid, I think, next. I'm not. And again, we looked at models. And again, there's a repeat now. Rostow, Rosenstein, Roden, the big push. So what is the role of foreign aid in development? We talked of big push theory. It fills a physical savings gap theory. And we talked in terms of, when we talked about foreign aid, we talked about it has direct effects on economic growth. It has indirect effects on economic growth. Some positive, some negative, under both. So what does it do to technological adaptation? What does it do to technological learning? What does it do to productivity? What does it do to growth? What's Dutch disease? There's a lot of points under these. So the other general point about is with each topic, learn all these separate points, and your real key is, can you give them to me precisely and quickly? Because you have, an hour or two, and there's a lot of materials. So just think about that. If, when you do practice essays, or even if you don't do a complete practice essay, write the points down. So I think when you see it visually, it helps you to reproduce it visually. So have these points written down in your head. If these are the 10 or 6 topics you're going to know, have them, you should know them intimately, visually, by the time you arrive at the exam. Yeah, so we did foreign aid. I'm trying to think now, let me go. We did, conflict. Yeah, now the issue of conflict, is very related to poverty. It's also related to climate change. However, you should, if you're studying that, you study that on its own as well, yeah? But it's connected. So when you write about poverty, if you're doing a poverty, if that's your prep, you would bring in a little bit from the conflict, yeah? And also it's it's also related to climate change. The main arguments there were greed and grievance, yeah? The debate there, and that's something too. Yeah, we did gender, again, something that connects to the whole poverty and inequality issue. It's gender, we said, is also a form of horizontal inequality. And so one thing I would like to see in an essay is that to connect the different topics. Yeah, and I think that would also kind of, that's the difference between a good answer and a very good answer, is that if you can connect the topics we've done. And a lot of it's very fluid, so you can really. Having said that, you can't write an essay on poverty focusing only on gender. You would do, all the poverty issues, the relationship between, say, growth and poverty or poverty and growth, and you'd bring gender in as one dimension. So, for example, will economic growth necessarily, is it enough to reduce poverty? At times, yes, but how about specific case of poverty, like female-headed households, for instance? Would growth alone trickle down to these groups which, yeah? So, again, you connect the topics. Yeah? The other thing about exams is don't be scared. I mean, that's the main thing, really. Just be confident. It's not that bad. It's not that difficult. If, you've turned up at the lectures, you've looked at the lecture notes, studied the lecture notes, really, as Ramin said, our expectations are different. This is, you're sitting there. Some people can't perform that well, when you have to sit there and answer this question. So just be calm about it. Have it, study calmly. I think if you study calmly, you can do your exam calmly. Because if you're panicking at the point of revision, then none of this is going to, you have to be infused with it quite calmly. So that's gender, right? Right, and then the last 3 topics, we did China, we did India, we did Sub-Saharan Africa. And the way to study that, and the way we always talked about that, is really the 3 topics are linked. So they also come as one, in a way. And the issue is, China is our shining light, leading example in lots of ways. In not many ways, but in some ways. So what is the experience of China? How useful is it in terms of, say, agricultural development for Sub-Saharan Africa? How useful is learning from China important for poverty reduction, for economic growth? Can we just make a blanket statement and say Sub-Saharan Africa should do exactly what China did? Is that valid? Yeah? And then, or what part of that statement is valid? China did when? When we say China's reforms, we've talked about 4 phases of reforms. So which phases matters? All of that is, but really it should be a reflective revision on that one. When you study China, India and Sub-Saharan Africa, study them together and look at what can one learn from the other. And obviously Africa is the poorest performing group of countries there. So what can this country that's lagging in terms of growth and poverty reduction and technology and HDI, what can it learn from China? Can it? And where can it not learn? Where does it have to find its own way? Yeah, so those, we've talked about all of this. I have one other point to make about China. Yeah, so know about the reforms, what are the phases? Oh yeah, and we talk about Sub-Saharan Africa. Always remember we are talking about a really heterogeneous group of countries. And mention that only if the essay is to do with Africa, and you're answering that question, mention that. And say, we talked about 4 types of countries within. I think I gave you different groups, the really slowly growing countries and more, the better performing countries. So talk about that. And another overriding hook I think I used for all of these lectures is the notion of structural transformation. coming from the Danny Roderick paper. And if you're looking at these 3 countries, and if you're doing if you're going to prepare an essay on 3 countries, I would hook it on that. One of the things I'd hook it on would be, did China experience structural transformation? Yes, in many ways. Has Africa experienced, and why has it not? So that's one kind of little, remember the escalator? And escalator sectors and escalator industries, yeah, all of that. So that should be, so this is a more broader point, therefore, is that when we talk about individual countries or comparing China to Sub-Saharan Africa, bring in kind of theoretical hooks that you can use. So structural transformation, structural change, they are kind of, simple hooks that you can use for that. Yeah? Do you have any questions on? So, yeah, go.
Depends on how 7 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa or a regional understanding of the whole.
I think you need a bit of both. You need a regional, my lecture. So if you're going to do the 3 countries, you should know the material I gave on my lecture notes. Because the issues are, that's what I said in the lecture, was that we have a heterogeneous, mixed up group of countries, but they have similarities, which is why we talk about them together. And so the issue of deindustrialization. So the opposite of China. China had rapid industrialization. What do we find in Sub-Saharan Africa? Premature deindustrialization, not mature deindustrialization. So these, points are generally relevant, and I think you should know them. You can have Nigeria as a nice example because you're doing it for term 1 as well, but you should also know the region generally. Mm-hmm. Any more? So poverty, inequality, growth, I'd say goes one. So institutions feeds in everywhere. It feeds into poverty, because you can, that it could be relevant. It feeds into foreign aid, feeds into conflict, and it's a topic. It's a standalone as well. The theory of, our institutions, the main reason developing countries remain poor. That is the main argument. Some say yes, some say no, and if yes, why? If no, why not? Yeah. We do foreign aid, we did gender, we did climate change. That's another. And that, I think, to be fair, is a standalone topic. So if you're doing climate change, make sure you know it really well. You can't feed in just a bit of poverty into the climate change topic, though it's relevant. And the main issue we talked about is why is it particularly might be a problem for developing countries. And when something like climate change, you have to begin your answer by saying, what is climate change? Yeah, because there is no agreement about it. So what are the indications we use, what are the indicators we use for climate change? How do we know why we're saying there is climate change? So, and what does it mean in terms of future events? We talked about more extreme, less frequent things like monsoons and cyclones, but more extreme. So, and what does general warming mean for agriculture, for productivity? I've given you a lot of notes on that. There's also the point that in climate change, a lot of these are hypothetical. We don't really know. We are using models, which have a huge range in their forecasting. So we talked about agricultural yields, I remember, and prices. But these are just hypothetical, but still, this is what the general models suggest. So the issue on climate change, the key issue if you're revising, when you revise with an analysis in mind, with a question in your mind. Yeah, so you're not sitting there blankly studying everything I've told you about climate change. You're looking at through a lens. So it's a certain question in mind. Yeah, it could be, is it good for growth? Is it bad for growth? Is it bad for poverty or general development? What is the likely effects of climate change? And something like climate change, and quite different to something like gender, you should begin by defining what do we mean by climate change. And I've given you slides on. And very quickly, you can make those 5 points, really quickly in 2 sentences. These are some of the indicators. Yeah.
We'll give a 5 minutes break. When you come back, we'll start practicing questions for term 1. That means each of you will prepare, right, a structure of an essay, what I'm going to discuss, how I'm going to discuss it, right, for 3 topics of term 1. Okay, so 5 minutes break, you come back, you start to practice. You pick 3 topics and you sketch the structure and the key issues in that book. Okay?
Let me double check whether it's recording or not.
Oh, right, yeah. You tend to record them, no? Yeah, I didn't.
Okay, it's recording.
I need to, I'm just going to talk to you about the marking. So the exam's on the 13th, are we right? Yeah? What is it, do you have to give us a deadline for marking, or what's the...
I'll let you know. I'm on one side because this is I think how it works.
Yeah.
I'll mark them,
Yeah.
give it to the faculty, and we do the second marking,
Yeah,
and we
but-
set a date once
Yes.
you just
I think for us, though, the second mark, are you going to mark all of them?
yeah.
The second mark,
All of them, and then we're gonna agree.
then we have an agreement marking. Okay, fine. How are you?
Yeah, not hard. Okay. Let's prepare for 3 topics. Turn 1. The things I want you to think about is bullet. When I ask you, you think about bullet points. Key issue in that topic. Sorry. Key issues and structure of the essay. So when we go to the question, so first you think about the key issues. Then when we get to the questions, you specifically think about structures and give me the answers. Okay?
We're choosing 3 questions from the ones that you gave.
3 topics. If you have the questions, that would be ideal. If you have you don't have the questions in front of you. But I'm going to go back to the questions, right? So, if you have the questions in front of you somehow for those weeks, we're going to talk about the questions. I'm not going to invent the questions. We're going to talk about the past year questions, which I've already shown you. Week 10. We'll do first one. Remember, if you look, a relief. Like, remember that whenever you're panicking, just think about it. You just need to know what was in the lecture. You know, the lecture summarized the whole point. Different debates. As long as you know the lecture, you attend the classes, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Five minutes.
All 6 of then.
No, not. Well, you can do. Let's start whenever you want. 3 at least. 3 minutes.
Like the next 5 minutes.
General things, key issues.
Okay.
We start from the end to the beginning. Okay, let's start. Okay, first question, we'll go to 2015. Natural resource scarcity is much more likely to promote economic growth than natural resource abundance. Again, pay attention to the question. Scarcity and abundance. Discussed with reference to both Asia and Africa. Okay, who are prepared for this topic? Hands up. Hands up. Who else? Hands up. Hands up. Yep. Yep. Okay, key issues in here came to your mind.
And what economic and political explanations for the resource card?
Economic explanations, can you list them?
Dutch disease, Waldbesichtung, I can't remember the third one.
What was that again? Could you speak a little bit louder?
Dutch disease.
Dutch disease, very good. What else?
The volatility
Very,
channel.
very good.
And I can't remember the third one.
Anyone?
Rentier state.
Very good. That's not an economic explanation.
Rubbish singer.
Probably Singer, very good. Ahmed, yes. No. What was your name? Your name again?
Me.
Yes.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't me. Good name.
Who said it? Jacob. Okay. His hypothesis. What else? Dutch disease volatility, I would say state overstretch.
Civil war.
Of these economical political explanations. So political explanations. Political explanations. Rentier state theory. What else? Conflict. Yeah. Okay. Now, the question. These are the key issues that's gonna, in this topic. How do you structure your answer?
You discuss the arguments and then you do case studies.
Give me topics of your each section. Give me the headings.
Arguments that natural scarcity does promote growth, arguments that it doesn't promote growth.
Before that, you discussed the resource curse. This question relates to the resource curse. What do we mean by resource curse? Then,
And the arguments for and against.
could you speak a little bit louder?
Then the arguments for and against that it does promote growth, but it doesn't. promote
Very
growth.
good. Very good.
Yeah, and then case studies of countries.
So the arguments, remember, that says it's a curse are political explanations and economic explanations. So in your sections, you can say, I'm discussing economic explanations and then discuss political explanations. You're not going to do all of them, right? I'm not expecting you to name everything, right? You can say, two from each, okay? You're not required to just explain everything, okay? And what were your examples?
Nigeria,
Nigeria as a curse example.
South Korea.
South Korea as a natural resource scarcity country. Very good. And what would be your answer to the question? Conclusion?
It depends.
It depends on what?
Quality of institution.
Quality of institutions. Very good. So let's review that one more. You talked about what do you mean by resource curse? Arguments for resource curse, the economic explanations, political explanations. Arguments against it, basically saying that it's not destiny, it depends on your policy and institutions. And then the conclusion. If you just follow this structure, which is clear, you don't necessarily have to follow this structure. You can come up with another structure, right? We're just practicing. If you follow this clear structure with good handwriting, remember, good handwriting, clear structure, a clear answer to the question, you get a first class mark. Okay? Yes?
So did I get this right? We don't have to name all of them.
Well, you can list, I'm not expecting you to explain all of them in detail. You can just list them and you say, I'm going to explain these in detail, right? You're not going to have enough time to go through all of this, right? Okay, the other topic, any questions about this, right? So, developmental states. Okay, let's focus on 2015. The key contribution of government in fast-growing East Asian economies has been the management of free trade. Okay, anyone prepared for developmental states? No one? What are the key issues in this debate? General things. Industrial policy. Exactly. It's all about industrial policy. What do we mean by industrial policy? State intervention. Yes, could you give me an example? What constitutes intervention? In what ways can, and what are the tools that a state can intervene in an economy? Tariff protection, very good. What else?
Devaluate currencies.
Devaluate your currency to encourage exports, very good. Exchange rate policy, tariff, what else? Like non-tariff protections, yes? Yes? What kind of subsidies? Yes, but give me an instrument.
Credit.
Credit subsidies, very good. Tax rates, all of them are industrial policy. So the East Asian economies have followed industrial policy. Right? The state played an active in management of foreign trade. Right. It provided tariff protection for domestic for domestic industries, and at the same time, it encouraged exports. It was not free trade. Protectionism, and then coupled with export promotion. Okay? So, structure of the essay. Anyone? What do we begin by? Very simple ones. You say pro-trade argument. Remember, developmental studies about free trade, really, pro-trade. That says, right, if you don't manage trade, you don't need to manage foreign trade or foreign investment. Just open up. The catch-up would automatically happen. The arguments for pro-trade, the arguments against trade, which says you need state intervention. Here, you talk about industrial policy. Country examples for successful industrial policy. South Korea, what else? Taiwan, China, you could argue, Japan, a lot of examples. Conclusion, your answer to the question. Anyone come up with a smart answer to this question? Yes?
State intervention to promote industrial, state intervention to promote industrial policy is necessary, but you have to aim to move towards an export-oriented market to provide incentive.
Very good. Very good. Basically, you're saying that industrial policy is necessary, but we've got industrial policy and industrial policy. You have to do it right. Right policies, export promotion, coupled with domestic production. And you have to implement those policies effectively. Very good. So basically, industrial policy, but you have to come up with right policy choices. Very good. Yes?
In which case does it go pro-trade?
Pro-trade, I would say Hong Kong. Hajun Chang has a lot of Hong Kong, Netherlands, Singapore, maybe not really. What else? Read Hajun Chang's. He's a good reference about this. He talks about free trade examples. Okay. Free trade topic. Foreign trade. Okay, 2012. And I expect a lot of people prepared for this. Remember, it's about quality, not quantity, good handwriting, clear structure. I'm not expecting a sophisticated answer. Okay, developing countries should not try to industrialize because their comparative advantage lies elsewhere. Okay, could you give me an example of elsewhere? You know, agriculture and primary sector. Very good. A lot of countries with big lands, with good natural resources, they can compete in agriculture and primary sector. Okay. Key issues here. Again, you could say pro-trade. Again, yes, pro-trade against trade. Let's go deep into it, for instance. Pro-trade, what are the arguments? Pro-trade arguments. Adam Smith and Ricardo, very good. The most important thing you have to remember here is that catch-up happens automatically. Industrial upgrading happens automatically. Open up, the foreign investors will come in, pick the sectors you can compete in, invest in them, you become rich, and gradually you move towards capital intensive, technology intensive industry. Step by step. Doesn't need any intervention. Against trade, specific examples. Frederick List, we had it. And more specifically, most important in this question, the most furthest Singer hypothesis. Anyone remember this hypothesis? Yes?
The price of commodities decreases relative to the price of manufactured in the long run.
In the long run, exactly. So if you specialize in production of primary goods, right, you're going to be worse off in the long term. Dependency theory is related to that. You can give me quantity examples, for dependency theory. India in 19th century, for instance, the British, forced India to export raw materials rather than manufactured goods. A lot of sub-Saharan African countries today, Angola, Congo, right? They have this kind of relationship, but with China, for instance, right? They export raw materials and import industrial goods. So the idea is that you should escape from your comparative advantage. Otherwise, you get stuck in the primary sector. So, conclusion. You can actually say, I don't really care. You can passionately defend pro-trade. I don't care. In the end of the day, I really care about the clarity of your arguments and the example. I really don't care about the position you take, right? I think we usually give, first class. This happens a lot. You give first class marks to students who you don't necessarily agree with their essays, but it has been written in a very good way. Okay. Conclusion. Just give me a conclusion for this question. Anyone? Answer to this question. Christy, yes?
The conclusion I got was developing countries should try to industrialize despite if their comparative growth lies elsewhere. They can use their comparative growth to further fund industrialization, but it also depends on what kind of industrial policies that will be conducted by the state to grow.
So, in the end, should they start with their comparative advantage or not?
In the end, they should start, but they need to industrialize.
This is it's not a clear answer. Yes, it's not a clear answer.
Well, comparative advantage can change. So when you acquire physical capital, your comparative advantage
is this a pro-trade or against trade argument?
Rather against trade.
No, it's pro-trade.
Well,
because the pro-trade people say the exact thing. Say, start with your comparative advantage, you get rich, you can go to the other sectors. This is what they say. The pro-trade people never say that you're going to produce agriculture for the rest of your lifetime. No. They say it's going to gradually change. Against trade, people say, if you listen to them and start with primary sector and agriculture, you're going to get stuck. You never get rich to enter into the other sectors. Have capital for further industrialization.
I think that another point, and so you touched this, is the notion that is comparative advantage given, or can you create it? Also, that's another, because, so that fits into it. If you can create it, this is what industrial policy is about. You create areas of new comparative advantage, which make you competitive in new areas in the future. So
in the future.
Yes,
exactly.
in the future. It's about creating future. So comparative advantage need not be an old-fashioned externally given. It's something else. Yeah?
So the debate is a static versus dynamic. Yeah. You might say that today you have an advantage in primary and agriculture sector, right? Today. But against trade person says, don't worry about today. Let's look at it long term, right? In the long term, it's beneficial that we go away from the things that is profitable for us to produce today, right? We incur a loss, we support some of our industries, the infant ones, but in the long term, we can create global companies like Samsung, like Toyota. So it's a long-term view of it.
And that connects to to my lecture on China. If you remember the reforms in China, we talked about the fourth stage of reforms, which are happening now, and that was all about identifying high technology areas where production can move away from labor intensive into super high tech niche areas. So that again, you're creating comparative advantage. So all these topics are from term 1 to 2 are also related then.
Okay, investment in human capital. Anyone who have prepared for this topic? Okay, no problem. Let's go one by one. Key issues in here. That's not a key, that's a question. The key issues. Yes?
Education optimists versus education pessimists.
Exactly. Education optimists in here. Give me an example. Non-Pritchett, yes. I would say Gary Becker, human capital theory here. Human capital theory. It says, look, the main capital, the most precious resource is the knowledge. You're educating people. Development is about having educated people. Once you have that resources, that is the most precious asset for economic development. Versus education pessimists. And the best person here, education pessimists, Easterly. And what is his argument? Can someone summarize his argument? Yes?
Something along the lines of you get diminishing returns to your human capital investment. So people don't know, it's like if you work in a factory with a machine, right, you only need to learn up to a certain extent so you can use your machine to the maximum productivity.
That's for the physical capital. There's a diminishing return for physical capital. Yes?
Basically said that incentives matter.
Incentives matter. Exactly. Thank you. You can pack a factory with the latest technology, with a lot of PhDs, from Harvard, right there. And it doesn't guarantee that that company will be productive. Very good. Incentives matter. Right. And secondly, I would say, if you have just look at a lot of Arab Spring, not Arab Spring, I don't know what to call it anymore. Arab catastrophe, I don't know. Yeah. In 10, 20, 30 years' time, we'll know. So, a lot of idle educated people. Taxi driver who's got a master's degree. So, the fact that you have a lot of educated people doesn't mean that they're automatically get employed. You need to create employment, an active policy of employment to use these resources. Otherwise, you have invested a lot on people, they come out of education, right? They don't contribute to the economy. So in a way, you've wasted your investments if you look at an economic way. So this brings us very nicely to the conclusion here. Anyone? You can just summarize these things in 2 sentences to the conclusion. Anyone? I'll pick someone, okay, random. Yes?
Education is necessary for growth, but it must be applicable to the sectors you want to expand on. So it has to do like training programs or whatever.
Training program. Okay, let me ask you. So you mentioned this first part of the answer is not necessary. Okay. Sorry, it is necessary but not sufficient. So the second part is that, okay, if we have education, what else do we need to combine with education? Incentive, that's very broad. What do you mean, right? Good industrial policy, good employment policies, right? So we have to, you talk about other ingredients as well. is not just about having an educated population. We need to have investment in infrastructure. We have to basically have a good industrial policy that gives incentive for firms to employ these, educated people and use them productively. Right. If your industrial policy is like domestic protection, no export promotion, then the firms don't have an incentive to use these educated people, to their potential and productively. So basically, you say it's not. It is necessary but not sufficient. You have to couple investment in education with X and Y and Z. Right? Okay. Maybe we would want to do one from week 2? Okay. Yeah, you want to do it now?
Well, I'll do a general, just a way of coming back to my point about, it's not a question, not from paper, but a way of thinking about it. So, for example, foreign aid. And I read this question somewhere. Why is foreign aid good for development a silly question? No one's going to ask you that, but this is a way of thinking. Why is the question, is foreign aid good for development? Why is that a silly question? Right? It's a silly question because you've got to, if you're asked this question, why, it's not necessarily a silly question, but it's just a way of you thinking about. Okay, we talked about foreign aid. When we say foreign aid, what do we mean by foreign aid? Because this phrase, foreign aid is good for development, right? You've got to know what do you mean by foreign aid, because there are different types of foreign aid. Yes, there's concessionary aid, there's aid that comes with conditionalities, there's various types of aid. So if you have a question on, if somebody says, is foreign aid good for development, you're entitled to say, well, that's a silly question. Because, tell me, what are you asking me? What type of foreign aid? Yeah, because there are concessionary aid with conditionalities, which could be bad for development. Secondly, what do you mean by good? Is it going to, what do you mean by good? And thirdly, what do you mean by development? Okay, so develop good for whom? Within, is it enclave type? We talked about, foreign aid that, causes, it can be bad for development if it leads to Dutch disease effects, or if there, what do you mean by development? Are you talking about poverty reduction? Are you talking about economic growth? Look at, are you talking about investment? So again, my question is about precision. My way of thinking about it is, so clarify when you answer, is what I'm saying. When you talk about foreign aid, it's not about defining, it's about clarifying. And there's a difference there. Okay, I'm not saying spend your time defining, but be very nuanced and be very sure about what you write. So, and just all the time have the overall framework should be the lecture notes. Because in the lecture notes, and both of us, we use a certain analytical thread. And that is the way to, so for foreign aid, for instance, we talk about effects on growth and development, on poverty reduction. We talked about two types of effect, direct effects, indirect effects. Both, some of them can be negative, they can be positive on growth and development, on investment, so that is, that is the way of looking at a question, is kind of think, where was this question? The one before, you had one about living up, the Easterly comment about living up to expectations. Education, what expectations? You should then clarify that when so your question should be expectations for growth, and so be clear about what you're, so therein lies the kind of the clue sometimes also lies in the question. Because you have to be and it's nothing, no one's trying to trick you. And at first year levels, questions are always very straightforward, direct questions. But be clear about your answer. And it's all stuff we've taught you, so it's very, very straightforward. Let's take another example about, I've gone through poverty with you so much that I don't think we need to. The question on institutions. Come back to institutions. Now that is another bit of a vague concept. So if you're studying institutions, be as precise as you can in the way you understand it. So what are these institutions we're talking about? What do we mean by institutions? Some of those readings I gave you were a little bit complicated, but I did try and simplify in my slides. So the colonial origins of institutions, why do they matter? Yeah, why do they matter for development? What is the key point that this new, the relatively recent literature on institutions, empirical literature, what is their key argument? And I just said that the key argument is that differences in growth per capita across countries can be explained by the quality of institutions. Yeah, and however, what is the problem with that? We use all kinds of proxies to measure institutions and so on. So, study it in terms of, can you explain differences between countries using only institutions? Are there other factors? But before you get to that, we have to know, what do we mean by institutions? In what way do institutions affect growth and development according to these various schools of thought? Yeah, and then what are the critiques of it? So, what's the Sachs critique, who says geography matters? That some of the arguments that institutional economists make, for instance, that malaria argument, he says it's actually an argument based on geography, not based on historical factors and institutions. And then you can go, and how does this link to other issues like poverty? Okay? So have a kind of, some topics are quite easy to study. Something like institutions, to be honest, is a more difficult one to study because it's vaguer in its concept. It's not as easily measurable. It's slightly more complicated. So therefore, when the topic is complicated, try and simplify it for yourselves. Remember, you're a first-year economics student, so understand it at a fairly simple level. And even these, complicated articles, just get the essence of it. That's what matters. Really, this is, 1 year after A-level, so think of it like that. You are, you try and, understand it simply, but write in that way, write it. You have to understand it thoroughly. That's what, so don't write things you don't understand. That's the other, we try to bluff and try and, I can try and, pull the wool over their eyes by kind of pretending to understand. Don't. Just write down things you really understand from first principles almost. So that's the other. Yeah, so 2 topics that give you just about nuance and precision, and be analytical. Don't just give us points. Be analytical about the points. That is why you're at university, is to really analyze questions. And as we said before, the answer to any question in economics is it depends. And then that's what you have to show us. It depends on this, it depends on that.
Okay, we'll go quickly to the other topics. Any questions on the topics Sonali covered? So let's go quickly to investment in physical capital. A lot of overlap with foreign trade, as mentioned by Sonali. So key issues here. Key issues, general things, you already have it there. Anyone? Maggie, 1, 2. Key issues. Anyone else? Okay, basically, it's all about investment in physical capital being sufficient or necessary for economic growth. Some people say it is sufficient, some people say it's not sufficient. Remember Harrod-Dumore model. It says if you give a machinery to each people, you increase their productivity, therefore you have economic growth. Right? What's the problem with this argument? Diminishing returns, very good, thank you. I keep giving machines to Simon, right? His productivity is actually going to go down afterwards, right? Actually, even this is a negative. So the first machinery, a lot of improvement. The second machinery, improvement, but not as much as before. Diminishing returns. Very good. And there was another problem you mentioned, which applies to this as well. Incentives. If I give a good machinery, Simon doesn't guarantee that you learn to use it properly, or you have the incentive to learn to use it properly. So, diminishing returns and incentives. Now, remember the Rosto's model, that was another problem here related to savings gap. Anyone explain the savings gap again? Sorry? The other way around. When you're poor, you don't have money to save. When you don't have savings, you cannot invest. If you don't invest, you cannot give machinery to the workers or build ports or build roads that increase the productivity. So you're in a trap. Okay, the savings gap. Which leads us to Rostow's model. Says you need a foreign capital. Rostow's model. Now going back to this question, Rostow says that, read the question first, carefully please. Now let me answer this. What happens if you don't listen to Rostow's model and jump into capital intensive industry? The leapfrogging argument, remember? Can you compete in those? Yes.
Oh no, when leapfrogging does cause high debt.
Yeah, why high debts?
Because you're gonna have to borrow very extensively in order to leapfrog.
Exactly. You don't have enough capital to go for the capital intensive industries. How are you going to find them? You're either going to force savings at the household level, you're going to borrow, which creates another problem, or you can get a lot of aid, which creates a lot of political problems, your political dependence.
Did we do an example of a country which had a focus on capital intensive for its early stage of industrialization?
That's correct.
Capital intensive at the early stage? India. If you look at my India lecture, we talked about the Mahalanobis model, the emphasis on heavy capital intensive industry, and then what went wrong with that. Yeah? So connected again, term 1, term 2.
So you could talk about, going back to this, you could talk about these things. It says, Rostow's model talks about the saving gaps problem, right? And then start with light industries because it doesn't need a lot of capital, and then go for capital intensive industries. If you don't listen to this, these problems happen. You either get into debt, right? You either end up forcing a lot of savings from your households, tax them a lot, or you become reliant on foreign aid. Okay? So the conclusion, you can say, it depends. Jacob, can you come up with a conclusion for this? No. Do you agree that we always have to start with textiles and never jump to capital intensive industry?
You can jump to a degree, but not too far.
Thank you. Very good question. I mean, a very good answer. If you give this answer, it's a very genuine thing. Say, look, you can do it. It's not that you always have to stick with textile. You sometimes have to make distance, but don't do it too much. So it's some way between. We're not throwing easterly out of the window completely, right? There's an element of truth. You need to have the right industrial policy. Okay, population and labor. Let's do this. Does rapid population growth always lead to slower growth in output per person? You already have the key issues there. How do you structure this essay? Anyone? That's a very easy structure, this essay. Audra?
Yes, it does, and no, it doesn't.
Yes, it does, and no, it doesn't. Why?
So,
It's. Could you go for the second sentence?
yes. So, population growth can lead to greater innovation,
Okay.
which can increase productivity.
Look, let's go for the structure. What is your structure? Before the conclusion, what is your structure for this? What is the effect of population? What were 3 schools of thought that we discussed about this topic? It's already there. Optimists, pessimists, and somewhere in between. New demography approach. Optimists, you remember what they were saying? Yes, population growth is actually good for income per capita, remember? Right? If you have more people in here, the standard of living of each of you will get higher. Why? Because the more intensity brings more innovation, and if you educate them, right, we have a spillover effect. We covered all these. Pessimists, remember, Malthus, right? You cannot feed these people, and we're going to have famine, and everything is going to be doomed, right? Now, new demography approach, somewhere in between. Anyone remember this? The most important school we taught. No. Anyone remember that? Demographic dividend? No?
Gift.
Demographic gift, yes.
So when you have a high population of economically active people with high investment, then you can make the most of it.
Yeah. What does that say about the effect of population growth on economic growth? Is it positive? Is it negative? Right? Positive? No. Yes?
Would it not depend on whether or not the government has good employment policy?
Nope. It's transitional. Remember, at the beginning of demographic transition is bad because you have a lot of young people, high youth dependency, and when that phase passes, right, you have a lot of working age population. That phase is good. So in a way, it says that the effect of population growth on economic growth is transitional. At the beginning, it's bad, and then it can become good, provided, as you mentioned, that when you're in the demographic gift phase, you can use this opportunity, you can create employment. Okay. Any questions? Okay, 2 more to go. We'll skip this. And let's go to this, and we're done. What are the limitations of using GDP per head as a measure of economic development? What would be your structure of the essay? Structure of the essay, anyone? Yes, Chrissy? Yes.
List the limitations of GDP and then mention the other.
Could you speak a little bit louder?
List the points of limitations of using GDP.
Okay.
And then suggest other indicators to measure economic development.
Very good. List limitations of GDP, suggest alternatives. Very good. Before that, I would add one thing. Any idea? What is GDP? How can we measure it? Remember 3 approaches: income, expenditure, and production. Yes. What are the shortcomings of GDP? Can you give me some ideas? Yes? Doesn't account for pollution, negative externalities. Very good. Yes?
Doesn't account for unpaid housework.
Unpaid housework. Very good.
It just measure the economic activity by nothing else.
Very good. This is quite difficult. These are technical problems, right? That you could potentially fix, but this is more of a philosophical problem. Say, look, in the end of the day, even if you can fix these problems, it's not just about becoming rich. It's a deeper problem there. Negative externalities, pollution, unpaid housework, work in a very misogynist way. It ignores all the housework done by women. Yes?
The black market.
Black market, informal market. Very good, very good. Owen? Sorry? Inequality, GDP growth. Very good. Again, deeper points. GDP growth doesn't say anything about inequality. Whose income is growing? It talks about an aggregate number growing. Yes.
When the income reaches a certain level, it becomes less important to us in terms of other indicators.
Less important for what?
Standard of living.
Standard of living. What do you mean by standard of living?
So when you have an income that can afford anything that you want.
Income, sorry?
When you have an income that can that's able to afford anything you want, then it becomes less important. So you can't really measure individual happiness.
Happiness, very good, very good. You say you become richer, but you don't become happier. Very good. Like money doesn't buy you everything after a certain threshold. Okay, very good. And suggesting alternatives we already talked about it. Any idea alternatives? HDI, what else?
Happiness index.
Happiness index, very good. And I'm looking for a good conclusion. It would be a conclusion to our course as well. What would be your conclusion here? Shall we throw GDP out of the window? Should we care about economic growth?
Yes, it's a necessary measure of development, but it's not a sufficient measure of development. There are also other factors involved.
Okay, you?
GDP does it really measure economic activity, not to measure development?
Very good, thank you. On that jolly note, I wish you a very good exam period. Remember, if you revise the notes, the lecture slides, good handwriting, again, I need to emphasize this, it's about the format. Good handwriting, good structure, clear, and a clear answer to the question. 3 pages can give you a first class. Good luck. Thank you.
They're very well taught. And nobody taught us like this.